Gonna be recorded on YouTube. Okay, we are live. Technical difficulties. We got Dr. Green's camera and his mic working.
Oh my goodness.
So we gonna record for a little bit
We
and
in
then
here.
we gonna go to sleep. Well, we gonna be letting March.
my goodness.
So we gonna record for a little bit. Let me hold.
We
And
in
then
here.
we gonna go to sleep. Well, we
Oh
gonna
my
be letting March. So we gonna record for a little. There we go. I got the sound turned off on the screen. So
good.
apologize in advance. You may hear some loud noises in the background because it is March Madness and the Ward household is all in. Y'all know. Dr. Green was talking about his brackets. That
It
is
is
sweet.
March.
Yep, and we had some technical difficulties with the sound, but the devil is a lie. We got to get in here. So y'all already know that we're gonna have a special guest April 21st. If you're looking at the chat, Mr. Bavu Blakes is gonna join me because Dr. Green has some things he has to take care of for the next couple of months. So Bavu will be with me in April and May, and then both of us will take a break, Dr. Green and myself, for the summer because we know you will be. So the next two conversations will be me with Bavu, and it'll be April and May. The next conversation is April 21st. Hopefully we won't have any technology glitches the next time. So what we were going to talk about today, Doc, at this kitchen table is driving our justice. What drives your justice as an anti-racist leader in our series on testing. Been talking a lot about how we're tested. But before we dig in, we always like to share our definition of anti-racism because it reminds everyone of what we're talking about, why we're talking about it, and how we define this thing that's kind of elusive to some in this conversation. And we just want to make sure that we have the same language and that we have the same understanding of what anti-racism is. So I'm gonna put it in the chat because one of our technology glitches was my computer wouldn't let me show the slides. Dr. Green's computer wouldn't let him talk. And you know what, Doc? It has been an evening. I guess the universe wanted us to just go watch March Madness. I don't know. Maybe that was it.
Doc, I know we're going to share the definition, but I think this is a real-time example of this work where all types of things come up where you can just be like, bump this. I ain't doing this. I'm about to just go off and do my own thing. And it's so easy with so many glitches, so many things trying to undermine, so many people trying to resist the work. It looks like nothing is happening, where it's just so easy to just say bump it and throw in the towel. But part of this work is just continuing to show up, and do that work. And I don't know, it's just something to be said about the messiness and all the interruptions that can happen, but the consistency to show up and do this work.
And I'm gonna be honest, I was the one that didn't want to show up. Dr. Green was like, "No,
We both.
I don't know, Doc.
We both. My computer tripping. I mean, I done been on Zoom for 2 years, and you telling me my sound don't work? I mean,
I was like, I can't hear you. So I put the definition of anti-racism in the chat. So it is the purposeful act of actively addressing systemic racism and systemic inequities, personally, professionally, and socially. Anti-racist educators are conscious and aware of their personal bias, their worldview, and how they are privileged or marginalized racially. An educator is anti-racist when they actively disrupt systemic racism and inequities from their own sphere of influence, and they partner with other anti-racist educators to enact collective disruption of institutional racism and systemic inequities. And so that frames how we think about anti-racism in education and how we think of ourselves as anti-racist leaders and what we try to do as we go about this work daily. And so we are just sharing this collective space with those who will see this video after we're done talking. We position this work deeply in inquiry, unapologetically in our lived experiences as educators. We position this work in community that is extremely important to us, that we don't try to pretend like we know it all, that we figured it all out. We have to be in community so we know what we don't know. And always remind ourselves that we don't know what we don't know also. And so we position this work in a collective of learners and leaders. And so that's why we position this anti-racist leader live conversation as a kitchen table conversation where we just come together. We're leaning together, we're learning together. And we don't position this work as a checklist, a multi-step process with a ready solution, but as an adaptive challenge. Don't nobody want us to do this? The system wants to continue to do what the system continues to do. And so it's not in the system's best interest for us to figure out how to disrupt it. And so we position ourselves in radical humility, truth telling, and grace, because it's important to us that we show up authentically and we show up in a way that lets you know that we're learning right alongside with you. It may seem like we know all the answers. We don't profess to, but we do speak with as much knowledge as we have. What else do you want to share with us, Doc?
Yeah, we speak from our lived experiences, unapologetically, who we are and how we show up, and our race, our gendered identities, and all the intersections. And you know, we are coming into this conversation to join an already ever going cacophony folks who are engaged in this work and this struggle. And so we're grateful. We're thankful for that.
Very grateful and thankful. And we always endeavor to honor the land that we reside on. We are coming to you from Central Texas on the ancestral lands of the Tonkawa, the Karankawa, the Comanche, and the Cowiiltican. As anti-racist educators, we recognize this land acknowledgement is a small step toward redressing the stories and practices that erase Indigenous histories and the presence of Indigenous peoples in our current reality. We recognize our responsibility to hold space for the histories, the current day reality, and ongoing history of Indigenous peoples. We share this land acknowledgement to urge you to learn more about the Indigenous communities where you live, where you lead, and where you work. And so our conversation today is about justice, and it's about what drives your justice. And Doc, I thought about this this quote from Frederick Douglass, and so I'll put it in the chat and then read it to you. So he says, oh, it broke it up from me. Okay. Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. And so when I think about what drives my justice, I think about safety, I think about liberation, I think about identity safety. And what drives my justice is, you know, thinking about myself. Today at work, we had a conversation about our fifth grade self. I always like to have those conversations about, you know, who were you as a child? How did you experience school? Because it humbles you and it reminds you that you sat in the space in school, just like the children that you profess to support today. And it just reminded me of my fifth grade self and what I needed and what I wanted. And, identity safety was very important to me at fifth grade. It was the year in my life when I went, I spent half the year in one city and the other half the school year in another city. And so whenever I think about that fifth grade year, I think about, the roots that I had and the strong ties to family that I had. I think that helped, having a great relationship with my mother, but also knowing that I had family that loved me. But what about the children who may not have that? And going into school, I didn't necessarily have the identity safety in that new school that I went to. And but I knew at home I would be okay. And so, what about the children who are getting it at school and at home, and they don't have that safety? How can we make sure that my justice is driven by how are we able to, or how am I able to, in whatever way I operate, to help adults create those kinds of identity safe spaces for children to be able to show up however they need to show up, and to be okay and know they're going to be okay when they get to school. Um, yeah. So that my justice is driven by, you know, how are we creating those spaces? And then how am I authentically living out my values of not being an adult that recreates oppression in schools and recreates oppression with adults, so that adults aren't able to center the comfort of children but only focus on themselves and their own comfort. I can't be the adult that creates the space that harms other adults, and if I am, I have to know about it. And how do I know about it? How do I build a relationship so that they can tell me about it, right? And so for me, it's identity safety, and it's humility, and it's being a willing learner, and a willing listener. And I think it's tested for me. My justice is tested when people don't give me the ability to show them that I can listen, that I do hear them, and that I'm doing my best to listen, to learn, to own that I don't know what I don't know. And when you're trying your best to be that, and be do this work in humility, I think that's where the test comes. It's like, okay, I say I'm listening, but maybe I'm not listening. How do I check myself? Because anti-racist leadership is about checking yourself, and also being able to be in community with other people who can tell you, now, sis, that's wrong, and be able to receive it, right?
It's good.
How about you, Doc?
You make me think of a number of things. I love that exercise of thinking about your fifth grade self. You
Mhm.
made me think about my fifth grade self, and it actually, I think, some of my initial passions for justice actually emerged in the fifth grade because two things happened. One was we lived on the east side of Detroit, born and raised Detroit, proud graduate of Detroit Public Schools. But we used my aunt's address to go to schools on the west side of town. So my mom is not that she didn't want us to be in on the east side, but people make decisions in context. And the schools
Mhm.
on the east side during that time were under resourced. And she wanted to do what was best for her three boys. And I can remember even as a fifth grader, like, I don't live at this address on the west side, but that my mom said, if they ask you, you tell them you live there. And that's when the first time these ideas around race, place, opportunity, and space, I was in the fifth grade. I didn't
Mhm.
have the language for it, but
Mhm.
I started to question, like, hold up, you know what I'm saying? So that was one thing that made me start to question in fifth grade. And then I remember also in fifth grade, my homeroom teacher name was Miss Hope, who was an amazing teacher, outstanding woman, um, black woman who was, I just think, an amazing educator. But I remember when it was time to do reading, um, some of us stayed with Miss Hope. Some people went to Miss Porter's class, and some people went to Miss Dickerson's class.
Uh-huh.
And I can remember the separation happening. I'm like, hold up, we was all just up in here, and I can remember the as a fifth grader, Dr. Ward, I can remember feeling like we had been sifted and sorted, and some people were deemed as being more intellectual and smarter, and like what they doing in Miss Porter's class and what they doing in Miss Dickerson's class. And I can remember as a fifth grader already that system separating us based on notions of intelligence and just questioning it and wondering it and wondering why I was in one class and wasn't in the other ones and wondering why so and so. And that all happened in the fifth grade. All happened in the fifth grade. So I think that fuels my justice in part. My justice is fueled by my lived experiences.
Yep.
It's fueled by the many concerns that I've had that have now become deep curiosities as a researcher. They're concerned by the histories, right? Because the moments in fifth grade where we got to go across town, that was significantly shaped by history of a Detroit public school that began in 1842. That was what 7 schools, 1 color school number 1, and 6 other white schools for the like. So it was a history. So that historical moment shapes it. I think also what shapes my notions of justice are the realities of people, like what people are experiencing, children, youth, adults, on a day-to-day. But then I think the other thing is like a radical reimagining of what the world could be. And so the longing and the yearning to create something otherwise also shapes it. To your question about what tests it, one of the things that really tested for me is, first I'll just say, give a brother some credit sometimes, because what tested for me is when I know we on a checkerboard, but people don't give me the benefit of the doubt that I'm playing chess. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know what's going on in this. I know the board we on, and I know, you know what I'm saying? I'm a couple steps ahead. You just got, you know what I'm saying? And so the thing is, though, you can play chess and checkers on the same board. The only thing is you're playing with different pieces and you engaged in different moves. Right. And so you got to like give a brother some credit. I know the moves that is being made.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? The strategy is different. And so I think the thing that tests me is when I feel like folks won't give me the benefit of the doubt to know I know what's going on here, even if I don't verbalize it. I know what's up. I know a game being played.
Yeah. I agree with that completely. Yeah. I see you. And just because I choose not to engage or say something doesn't mean I don't see it. And taking your silence, or I won't even say your silence, but taking your I would say taking my kindness as weakness, because I choose not to address it, right? And really thinking about when these things are happening, when you're on this checkerboard and people are not being strategic like you and thinking like you, and at the back of your mind you're like children. Like, if I engage right now, how many children am I going to harm because this adult can't handle what I'm going to say? Right? That tests me too. And most of the time I don't engage because, like, it's not about a right or wrong situation, and it's going to turn into a right or wrong. Am I right or are you right? It's not about that. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about, can the two of us do what we need to do to get out of the way so babies can breathe and live in these crazy, messed up school systems that we call public and charter schools. And don't think the private schools
private, parochial, all of them. Any place a Black child is.
Because at any place any child is in, because I've worked with private schools that want to do this work. Well, come in and do some SEL work with us, and come in and do some equity work with us. And they don't know what that means. And you come in and you talk about identity. That's like equity and SEL and all of that 101. And nobody gonna talk about themselves. I'm like, how you gonna talk about social emotional learning when you ain't talking about the social part?
Sure.
Part of the social is who is you?
Mm-hmm.
Who is you? How you showing up every day? That's number one. And then we wanting to skip social awareness. You know, I already skipped self-awareness, but you want to skip social awareness too. So how you gonna have a conversation about social emotional learning? You ain't talking about race. You ain't talking about national origin. You're not talking about LGBTQIA plus. And don't get me started. We's in Texas, so. But yeah. And then when you were talking about fifth grade, you know, I went from Houston to Galveston. They're 45 minutes apart. And it was like, you know, growing up in Houston, inner city Houston, like right now, the places that I grew up, that I spent most of my childhood, are now like the playground for all the rich and aristocratic, whatever. You know, that's downtown Houston. Downtown Houston went down, and now it's come up, and you got Minute Maid Park, and you got, you know, the Toyota Center. That stuff wasn't there when I was growing up. And I probably grew up about 15 minutes from all of that. Both of my grandmother's homes are still right there. And, you know, grandmothers were about 5 minutes apart, and we were about 15 minutes away from downtown Houston. That's where I spent most of my life. And we used my early life. We used my grandmother's address, one of my grandmother's addresses, for me to go to a school in her neighborhood when I was in 4th grade. So I spent kindergarten through 3rd grade in North Forest ISD, which is now defunct. It was swallowed up by Houston ISD. It was an all-Black school district. March Madness, I told y'all. And so, you know, listening to you talk about Detroit and history, and yeah, it just made me think about, you know, the school district that I started in. It was all Black. And, you know, I had a very solid, you know, all Black experience growing up, and proud Black experience. And so that definitely drives my justice. You know, I was supposed to be a lawyer. I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice because I saw how the brothers were treated when I was growing up and as I got older. And I wanted to be a conduit to help people circumvent the harm that was happening in the criminal justice system. So I walked into, you know, long story short, I walked into a 1st grade classroom, my 1st year teaching, saying, not on my watch will these babies, or 2nd grade was my 1st year. 1st grade was my 2nd year. But not on my watch will any of the students in my classroom leave not reading. And so that also drives my justice, you know, knowing that what I learned in my bachelor's program was, you know, many of the prisoners, you know, that were and are serving time, many of them you could trace back where they began to fall off. Some of them was as early as elementary school when they weren't reading. They weren't reading by 2nd grade or 3rd grade, and it pushed them on a trajectory to be a part of the criminal justice system for the rest of their lives. And so I went in with that critical analysis of schools that many 1st year teachers don't have, just by the simple fact that I had a degree in criminal justice. And so justice, criminal justice drives my justice, literally. So what else are you thinking about, Doc?
Well, you made me think of, I was trying to pull it up on my phone, but this quote by Meek Mill when Meek was locked up in the penitentiary, and he did this this interview for New York Times, and he has this quote, and he says, quote, "When I finally went to jail, I already knew everybody. Everybody I went to school with was in the jail," end quote. Right. And so it was just so profound. You
Mm.
know what I'm saying? Like that, the nexus where in some cases you walk into a school, you walk into a carceral institution. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
said literally, I walked up in the prison and everybody in the prison was everybody in school. That doesn't happen by a mistake.
No,
That doesn't happen by happenstance. That
no
is an intentional
intention.
system that is not broken, but well oiled and well functioning to produce that result. And
The
so this,
system is designed to do and reproduce
yes,
exactly what it is doing. It is not
uh,
broken. It is a well-oiled machine. The school to prison pipeline has been operating seamlessly
yeah,
for ages.
yep, yep. And this is where that collective disruption piece that you talk about in the
Mhm.
definition, your definition of anti-racist leadership, because
Mhm.
without the intentional disruption, those systems will continue to perpetuate the ways that they've been created to. But here's the thing, there are multiple places to engage in that disruption. And
Mm.
just because one doesn't engage in the way that people think, you
Mhm.
don't know all the multiple ways in which people are disrupting that mug beyond that one meeting that you may have been in. You know what I'm saying? So that's why the
Yeah, yeah.
testing piece is like, yeah, there was a place right there, but you know what? I got multiple other places where I'm working on this, right? And so people, it can be easy to not understand the larger dynamic and context of what we're engaged in. And so I think we have to extend grace to people who are working in these systems of oppression, that are doing work in multiple ways, some seen and unseen, but you still got to know that folks are engaged in the work. And so I think you make me think of that in terms of like the testing piece, that because there are multiple ways, you know, that people can engage in like this collective disruption. But
Mhm.
you also make me think about the part of the testing for justice for me. And I just had this conversation with a group of district leaders, and I think some of people saw it differently, which is okay. I
Mhm.
think there are places where you can diverge, and actually one of my colleagues, we diverged on it, I think, a little bit. But for me, an analysis of justice has to be anchored in an analysis of racial justice, and I'll tell you why. For a number of reasons.
Mhm.
And this often, so this is how I think about race and focus on race explicitly but not exclusively.
Yeah.
However, I you got to come back to race
Yeah.
for a number of reasons. My experience has been, again, this might not be everybody's. When we people will say, well, let's talk about class and let's talk about gender and let's talk about gender identity and let's talk about students experiencing homelessness. And I'm like, yes, amen. Let's talk about all of those. And let's also talking about, you know, black students and students of color who are LGBTQ
Mhm.
and black women and black students who are experiencing homelessness
And
and students of color.
indigenous,
In,
immigrant,
yes,
and
yes,
the issue with if I'm an immigrant, I'm a white immigrant versus an immigrant of color, that's still racial.
that's all bound up in race, is what I'm saying, right?
All bound up
That's
in
all
race.
bound up in race, right? And so
All of it.
you've got to reckon with that. And so you can do both of those, but you've got to come back through the racial dynamics of how those things play out. And again, so I believe you focus on race explicitly, but not exclusively. But as you come through those intersections, race has to be a part of that anchoring, just particularly in this context, knowing the ways in which race and racism have deeply impacted and shaped every institution, every function of what's normal. Race, race even functioned, shaped that functioning of what was intelligent in fifth grade, of who got to go here and who got to go where, even if
Oh,
the majority of the people in that space were black. And here's the thing that people got to understand: you can have a school that's full of white people and it be racist in a mug. It could be anti-black in a mug. You don't have to have black bodies or bodies of color in a space for white supremacy to continue to function,
no,
right? So
you
people,
don't.
they be
No,
like,
you
well,
don't.
we don't have to do this
And you
work
don't have
because
to have no white
you
people
ain't got it.
for
There
for
it
white
is.
supremacy to function.
There it is.
We
That's
some
deep.
of the
There it
worst
is.
people that do
There it is.
Because
There it is.
in order to be a professional, you got to take on some of those white supremacy culture characteristics. And you have to know what they are in you. And you have
Yep.
to know how to interrupt that stuff in your own self, right? But in order to get a bachelor's degree, there is some semblance of conformity, some semblance of assimilation that you have to go through at some point in your career as a student in those 4 years, 6 years, however long it takes you to get that bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
You got to walk in some whiteness. Otherwise, you ain't gonna pass. You're not gonna get that degree. And so, and then we got doctorates. And no, it took me 10 years to between my master's and my doctoral coursework. I'm like, I ain't going back to school.
Yeah.
I didn't want no doctorate.
Yeah.
10 years. That's how long it had been since I've been in school. I'm like, I don't want to go back to school. Who wants to do that? No. And then I went back and I'm like, oh Lord, I needed this. I was glad I did it because it really helped me understand more about what drove my justice. So I had a critical race lens going in, a critical race understanding going into schools because I had a degree in criminal justice. I didn't know it was called critical race theory because guess what? That was being developed when I was graduating from college. The analysis and the community of people in the legal system. I was thinking about that the other day. I graduated from college in 95. And the late 80s is when all of that stuff started, bubbling up, and they started writing about it and meeting about it and reflecting about it. So there was no way for me to know what critical race theory was, but it was all founded on all the things I studied in my bachelor's coursework. And so when I was introduced to Kimberly Crenshaw, when I was introduced to Derek Bell, all of that stuff made sense to me. And I was able to digest it very differently than a lot of my classmates. I'm like, this is like the air I breathe. I studied this stuff for 4 years. And I'm like, I get to read law cases again. Yay! I'm nerding out on law stuff. And they're like, ooh, this stuff is hard. I'm like, no, it's not. It's history to me. Like it's a history lesson. And so that drives my justice too, because I was teaching in inner city schools. My first year teaching was Thompson Elementary in Houston ISD, right off 288. And I'm teaching Black and brown children, mostly Black, and really wanted to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do as a teacher who didn't have no pedagogy. I ain't know none of that stuff. I got an alternative certification. And so that was shunned when I was coming in. And so I had to do, already as a Black person, you got to do 10 times more, be 10 times better. Luckily, I was in a Black school, so I was surrounded by brilliant Black people who, just welcomed me in and helped me learn, more about that. But I kind of had this in I guess intuitive sense, maybe because it was being nurtured in a large Black family, but I understood pedagogy, not as deeply as I needed to at the first year, but it made sense. And I understood curricular. I went to was taking classes so that I could learn more about curricular decisions. And so when I got to fast forward to my PhD program, I'm like, this is what I love to do now. I love pedagogy. I love curricular decision making. And so it was natural for me to look at, I'm sorry.
It's hard to hear.
That is the one lone ward who's here right now watching the games. He's been camped out on the couch all day, y'all. But I'm gonna let you talk, Doc.
No, I'm up here like, I need to go check this score and see what's happening. Like, oh, you know, you made me think, I feel like what graduate school did for me in getting a PhD is it gave me language for
Yep.
what I, you know what I mean? Because
Same. Hmm.
in some ways I could say like my grandmother was my first critical race theorist in that she didn't use that language, but
Yeah.
she understood how racism worked
Yeah.
and that it wasn't an aberration. It wasn't something that she knew it was something that was baked into the system. Now she didn't use the words of these tenets and all that stuff. And so it was it was a way of knowing and a way of being that
Hmm.
black people that I had been around subscribed to and embodied and lived. And so it was like the first time I got language
Hmm.
to help make sense of the way that I, in some ways, understood the world. And in some ways, it expanded
Yeah.
and it really made me rethink some
Hmm.
ways that I thought I understood the world. Um,
Same.
but
Same.
it gave me the language to now make these connections that were so pivotal and so important for me to even think about what is justice and how do I come to understand it? How do we labor and struggle for it and towards it? The many of people who have already engaged and are engaging in it. Um, and that's why this critical learning piece, it has to be just it's ongoing. And in the work that we engage in and the work that we do, you know, around justice.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Yeah. And I was thinking about as you were talking about your grad school experience, one of the things that I value in the relationship we developed is you push me to look at organizational change theory. And, you know, at the outset of that conversation, you were like, and all of these theories are aracial. They ain't talking about race. And I'm like, all of them, Doc? All of them. And it was up to me to figure out how to make those linkages,
Mm,
in my research and in my writing, because all the theories are solid, organizational change, but they're mostly written by white men, white women, and they're respected because they're written by white men and white women. And really looking at the lived experience of being a person who at the time was working in what I call the belly of the beast central
mm,
office in a large urban district. um, it gave me an analysis of what I was seeing, what I was experiencing, and gave me. I tried. He just. It really helped me think about how to navigate the system using some of the language of organizational change theories. And so like
mm,
one of my favorite ones was the book by Keegan and Lade. I don't know if I'm saying his name right,
mhm,
her name
mm,
right. But they talk about how the way we talk can change the way we work. And I used some of that language and some of that thinking around how to help adults in our system think about this progression from cultural destructiveness to cultural proficiency. So I layered
mm,
that onto what I knew about cultural proficiency, that framework, and we used that to help us think about our critique of what we were engaging in and how we as adults were centering our comfort and we were
mm,
decentering the
mm,
needs of students. And
mm,
so that language, I think it may have been also Charles Payne that talked about. No, I think they talk about public agreements. I think it's
yeah,
Keegan
yeah,
and Lay. They talk
mm,
about public agreements, and so I used I taught staff, we have to look at what our system is saying to us. Our system is saying that they value equity. They're saying that they value identity safe spaces. They're saying they value all these things because it's written in all the documents. And so, how do we parlay that into, yes, we value these things too. And here's the work that we're doing with schools, with principals, with teachers, with students to show that what the district values, we also value and they also value. And look at the results we're getting supporting the students in this way, supporting the teachers in this way. And so, using the language of the system to support the work, and you make the system better because you're actually using the language that the system says it values, right? And so that helped me make sense of, as I'm trying to support adults who are struggling, with, we're talking about starvation in May. This test, the STAR test in Texas. And so when we were being driven by this test, and this test makes us focus on data, it makes us focus on results, and it makes us do like rote memorization tasks so that we can say, yes, we checked this off, we checked that off, we checked. And checking those boxes doesn't give our children the comfort, support, and need for belongingness in our systems. And so that test comes in, and we're tested as adults to decide, what hill am I going to, for lack of a better term, die on? Am I going to create opportunities in my classroom, in my school, in my department at the central office level for adults and children to thrive? And how can I use the language of the system to do both? Because you can. It's possible to use the language of the system and meet the criteria, meet the expectations of the system, and still not harm children in the stead.
Mhm.
I don't know if any of that made sense, but that's just what my brain went.
Makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. You make me think though of Dr. Savannah Shange, who's a professor out in California, and she has a great book on like anti-blackness in schools, but she talks about this idea of within, outside, and beyond.
Is that from San Francisco?
I think she's out in San Francisco. Yep.
I just bought that book.
Yep.
It's sitting over there shrink wrapped.
Yep.
I was like, this sounds familiar.
Out in San Francisco. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a very good book. I really like it. I wish I knew the name, if I can remember the name of it. I could see the cover of it.
Look, let me get it. Yep. Savannah Shange, Progressive Dystopia.
That's it.
Anti-blackness and schooling in San Francisco. I'm telling you.
That's it.
Shrink wrap.
That's it. That is it right there.
Got it.
That is it right there. That is it right there. She writes about this idea of within, outside, and beyond. And I think you make me think about our justice work should help us situate if we're going to do work within a system, outside of a system, and or beyond the system, right? Thinking about something that's far more imaginative than the current system we have. I feel like the more I am in a predominantly white institution of higher education, that me working inside of that system may not be the greatest lever for change for me in this season of my life. And it may be I work in that system, but also thinking about how do you work beyond that, right? Not just outside of it, but thinking about something radically different and radically beyond that. But you just make me think of the importance of people situating their justice within or across one of those domains, because then, like we already talked about, the strategy, because my strategy gonna shift up if I'm working exclusively like beyond this system to create, or if I'm working in this system, or if I'm working outside, or I'm in collaboration with people. Like the moves I make, the way I'm thinking about playing chess it's still the same game, but I have a different philosophy when I play. When I'm playing chess against my brother, it's a different strategy when I'm playing against my little cousin, because I know, you know what I'm saying? They got been playing longer, different experiences, so on and so forth. But it just I think it will help people to situate how they engage in it, because often I've experienced people who are thinking beyond, but their everyday experiences is within, right? And so maybe it'll help them think about a shift in how they take up and lift up this work.
Oh yeah, that's too funny. You mentioned that book because I'm like, I literally just bought this book. Yep.
Yeah, it's a good book. It is a very good book.
Well, I'm looking forward to digging into it. I was trying to decide. I got three. I got one that look, I'm gonna just tell you what I got. I got one on Afro-Pessimism by Frank B. Wilderson III, because I was looking for a book from Dumas. And so I found The Future is Black, Afro-Pessimism, Fugitivity, and Radical Hope in Education, edited by Carl Grant, Ashley Woodson, and Michael Dumas. I know you know all of them. And then Afro-Pessimism was one that came up when I was looking for something by Dumas, and I found Progressive Dystopia too. Frank B. Wilderson. So I'm looking forward to reading those books. Yeah. Have you read those?
I've read chapters of the red book with the Kate, the edited one. You know, the Browns, they got a couple. They got a chapter in there.
I know.
They got a good one on like curriculum, and then there's a great chapter by Shamika Powell and Kevin Henry on racial realism and anti-blackness. Cousins or something. I can't remember. First Cousins. So it's a great book. And then Frank Wooderson book is good.
Yeah, so you have read Frank's?
I've tried to read it. You know, the anti-blackness, Afro-pessimistic work. Sometimes it can be so dense. I have to work through it, which has really made me deeply appreciate Kiana Ross's work, because you can get into it. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's a great book. You just take me some time to work through some of those deep concepts.
That's what I thought. Just looking at the title, I'm like, I think
like,
and it's bigger than the other two. So I'm like, let me pace myself.
Yeah, like I'm 2 hours on the same paragraph.
2 hours. Oh Lord, I'm gonna have to make sure I always do have my notes with me right next door. Oh man. Well, thank you for pushing me to get on this call.
Thank you. No, thank you.
We needed to have this conversation. I'm looking forward to sending this out to people. So that's any last thoughts on this topic? Testing. What drives your justice?
No, I don't think I have anything else.
Okay. I think we said a lot. Next kitchen table conversation will be with Bavu Blakes on April 21st. And Dr. Green will see you all again at the start of the new year. New school year. So next time you see me, you'll see me with Bavu Blakes in April and again in May. Thanks, Doc.
Thank you, Doc. I'm glad we did it.
Me too. Bye, everyone.